Every town has its legends, and in the tiny Florida backwater of Cypress Hollow, the story was always the same. Don't go into Dead Man's Hollow after sundown. I'd heard the tales when I stopped in town for supplies. An old woman rocking on her porch muttered a warning as I passed. The swamp don't let go of what it takes. A kid at the gas station whispered to his friend, "He don't know about the thing in the water." I brushed them off. Stories meant to scare outsiders. I'd been hiking and canoeing for years, always chasing the quiet, untouched places. I didn't believe in ghosts, monsters, or curses. But Dead Man's Hollow felt different. I paddled in as the late afternoon sun painted the swamp in gold and crimson. The air was thick with humidity, the cypress trees looming like ancient sentinels draped in Spanish moss. The water was black and still, broken only by the slow drift of my canoe. As I went deeper, the silence grew. No birds, no frogs, even the insects seemed to have vanished. Then I saw it, a clearing up ahead, just beyond a bend in the river. An island of land rising from the swamp, gnarled roots twisting over the earth. In the center stood the remains of a wooden shack, barely more than a skeleton of rotting beams and collapsed walls. Something about it made my skin crawl. Still, I pulled my canoe onto the shore. I was here to camp after all. I told myself it was just another abandoned homestead, swallowed by time. Then I saw the footprints, deep waterlogged footprints in the mud, leading from the water to the shack. I felt my chest tighten. They were fresh. I should have left right then, but instead, I stepped forward, following the trail. The shack's door hung open, swaying slightly, though there was no wind. I shined my flashlight inside. The walls were covered in marks, deep scratches, gouged into the wood, like something had tried to claw its way out. A shuffling sound came from the back of the shack. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. The flashlight beam flickered over the far wall, where something dark and wet dripped from the wood. Then I saw them. Eyes, low to the ground, gleaming in the light. The thing lurched forward. I stumbled back, heart hammering. For a split second, I saw its shape, long-limbed, skin black and slick, like it had been drowned, its mouth yawning open in a silent wail. Then it moved, faster than anything should be able to move. I ran, didn't look back, didn't care about my gear. I threw myself into the canoe and shoved off, just as something splashed into the water behind me. I paddled hard, my muscles burning. I could hear it in the water, moving just beneath the surface, keeping pace with me. Then, a hand, long, bony, too many joints, broke the surface and reached for my canoe. I screamed, hit it with my paddle. The thing let out a horrible gurgling hiss and vanished beneath the water. I didn't stop paddling until I was miles away, until I could hear the frogs and the insects again, until the weight of the swamp had lifted from my shoulders. When I got back to Cypress Hollow, I went straight to the general store, still shaking. The old woman on the porch looked at me and sighed. "It let you go this time." I never asked what she meant. I never went back to Dead Man's Hollow. But sometimes, in the dead of night, I dream of black water, and the thing that reached for me.
I never believed in ghosts until the night I met one. It started as a simple weekend trip. I'd been hiking and kayaking through Florida's backwoods for years, always chasing the thrill of untouched wilderness. Black Cypress Swamp was my latest destination, a place so remote it barely existed on maps. The locals in the nearest town, a forgotten little place called Osprey Hollow, warned me against going too deep. People go missing out there, the owner of the general store told me as he rang up my supplies. You hear them whispers in the trees, you turn right back. I laughed it off. Whispers in the trees? Probably just the wind, or maybe the natural creaks and groans of the swamp. But as I paddled through the still black waters, their words clung to me like the heavy humidity in the air. By late afternoon, the swamp swallowed the sun in a golden haze, the Spanish moss hanging from the cypress trees like tattered curtains. The water was unnervingly still, so black it felt like I was floating through the sky, only disturbed by the occasional ripple of a lurking gator. I found a small island, nothing more than a lump of earth and tangled roots, where I decided to set up camp. That's when I saw her. She was standing waist-deep in the water just beyond the tree line, half hidden by the mist. A woman, her hair hanging in wet, clumped strands over her pale face. Her eyes, God, her eyes were hollow, not just empty, but as if the light inside her had been snuffed out long ago. I called out, "Hey, are you okay?" She didn't answer. She only lifted one trembling hand and pointed at me. A chill crawled down my spine. The sun had almost vanished, and the swamp had fallen into an eerie silence. No frogs, no crickets, no rustling leaves, just that awful, suffocating stillness. Then she sank. Not like someone diving underwater, she just dropped. Straight down, disappearing beneath the surface without a ripple, like the swamp had swallowed her whole. I sat there, gripping my paddle, my breath locked in my chest. No bubbles, no movement, nothing. I should have left right then. Should have turned my canoe around and gotten the hell out of there. But I didn't. Instead, I convinced myself my mind was playing tricks on me. Maybe it had been a log. Maybe exhaustion was making me see things. So I finished setting up camp, started a small fire, and told myself it was nothing. Then, sometime after midnight, I woke up to the sound of dripping. It wasn't the soft patter of dew falling from the trees. This was heavier, closer. I sat up in my tent, heart pounding, listening. Drip, drip, drip. The sound came from just outside. I reached for my flashlight, my fingers trembling as I unzipped the tent flap. I swept the beam across the campsite and stopped cold. She was standing there, 5 feet away, soaking wet, water streaming from her tangled hair, her tattered dress clinging to her body. Her mouth hung open like she was trying to scream, but no sound came out. Her fingers were long, too long, the skin stretched tight over her bones, and her eyes, those hollow black pits, were locked onto mine. Then she lurched forward. I stumbled back, scrambling for my knife, but she never touched me. Instead, she collapsed, her body hitting the earth with a sickening thud. And just like before, she sank. The ground beneath her rippled like water, swallowing her up. Within seconds, she was gone, vanished into solid earth. I ran. Didn't pack up, didn't even take my flashlight. Just grabbed my canoe and paddled faster than I ever had in my life. The whole way back, I felt eyes on me, like the swamp itself was watching, waiting. When I finally reached Osprey Hollow at dawn, the store owner took one look at me and nodded. "She found you, didn't she?" he said. I was too shaken to speak. He sighed and pulled out an old newspaper from beneath the counter. The yellowed page told the story of a woman named Lillian Marsh, who had drowned in Black Cypress Swamp nearly 100 years ago. Some said her husband had done it. Some said the swamp had claimed her for its own. But all of them said the same thing. She never really left. I've spent years trying to forget that night, but sometimes when I close my eyes, I still see her standing there, still hear the dripping water. And when the air is heavy with rain, I swear I can still smell the swamp.
I never should have gone into those swamps alone. The locals in the tiny Florida town of Blackwater Bend warned me, shaking their heads as I loaded up my canoe. The swamp don't take kindly to strangers after dark. The old man at the bait shop muttered over his cup of black coffee. His voice was low and thick, like molasses. I laughed it off. I was a seasoned outdoorsman, and nothing scared me Not gators, not snakes, and certainly not ghost stories. I'd come to this part of Florida looking for solitude, a break from the grind of city life. A few nights in the wild, just me and the swamp, seemed like paradise. But by the time the sun started dipping below the cypress trees, I wasn't so sure anymore. I paddled deep into the heart of the swamp, past the tangled vines and the moss-draped branches that looked like skeletal fingers reaching for the sky. The water was black as ink, so still it was like a mirror, reflecting the twisted canopy above. A thick fog rolled in, swallowing everything in a ghostly haze. That's when I heard it. A splash, then a whisper. Too soft to be the wind, too low to be an animal. I froze, my paddle hovering just above the water. My heart thudded in my chest as I scanned the fog-shrouded trees. Nothing. Just eerie, suffocating silence. I told myself it was my imagination, but deep down, I knew better. I found a patch of dry land, a rare island among the endless swamp, and set up camp. As darkness swallowed the last traces of daylight, I built a small fire, its flickering glow barely piercing the fog. The swamp was deathly quiet, the kind of silence that makes you feel like something is watching. Then, at the very edge of my hearing, the whispering returned. It came from the trees, from the water, from all around me. A low, urgent murmur, like voices speaking in a language I couldn't understand. My blood turned to ice. I grabbed my flashlight and scanned the trees. The beam cut through the fog, illuminating only the gnarled cypress trunks and the eerie Spanish moss swaying in the still air. But then, something moved. A shadow just beyond the light's reach, tall and thin, flickering like a candle flame. My stomach twisted into knots. I wanted to run, but my body refused to move. The air grew heavy, thick with the stench of rotting flesh. A cold wind swept through my tent, and I knew I wasn't alone. The whispers grew louder, surrounding me, pressing into my skull. My breath came in short gasps as the figure stepped closer, its form shifting, pulsing like it was barely holding itself together. I still couldn't see its face, but I felt its eyes on me, boring into my soul. Then, as suddenly as it had come, it was gone. The whispers stopped, the air cleared, but the fear, the bone-deep, primal terror, remained. I didn't sleep that night. I sat by the fire, gripping my knife, watching the trees until the first sliver of dawn crept through the mist. As soon as there was enough light to see, I packed up and got the hell out of there, paddling harder than I ever had in my life. When I reached town, the old man at the bait shop just nodded knowingly. "You saw her, didn't you?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I never went back to Blackwater Bend. But sometimes, late at night, when the wind howls just right, I still hear the whispers.